The formula of criminal behavior shows the tendency of the criminal and his resistance to them may either result in criminal act depending upon which of them is stronger. In criminal tendency, for example, if the person grew up in a violent environment, he or she will have a greater tendency to become a criminal. Another situation is that if a person suffered an abuse that may alter his or her personality. The situation also affects the execution of the criminal act. If the situation is conducive to the criminal, the act will have a high possibility to occur. But if the resistance of the person is great compared to the situation and his tendency, then the criminal act may not happen. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, also known as Milwaukee Cannibal, was an American serial killer and sex offender who committed the murder and dismemberment of 17 men and a boy from 1978 to 1991. Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. He was described as an energetic and happy child until the age of 14, when surgery to correct a double hernia seemed to affect a change in the boy. Noticeably subdued, he became increasingly withdrawn following the birth of his younger brother and the family's frequent moves. By his early teens, he was disengaged, tense, and largely friendless. Dahmer claims that his compulsion toward necrophilia and murder began around the age of 14. But it appears that the breakdown of his parents' marriage and their acrimonious divorce a few years later may have been the catalyst for turning these thoughts into action. These factors elevated the tendency of Jeffrey to become a serial killer in his adulthood. In addition, pornography added in his fantasies for his victims, and also watching the movie Exorcist 3 gave him evil thoughts that he cannot control.
Watching the movie Exorcist 3 was also part of his ritual. It put him in the mood for murder.
I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape.
Dahmer murdered 17 men between the years of 1978 and 1991. He was careful to select victims on the fringes of society, who were often itinerant or borderline criminal, making their disappearances less noticeable and reducing the likelihood of his capture. He lured them to his home with promises of money or sex, then strangled them to death. He engaged in sex acts with their bodies and kept body parts and photos as souvenirs.
Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming chocolate factory worker, would eventually confess that he had seduced, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men. He even ate some of his victims' body parts.
He was clever enough that even the police did not notice his killings within 13 years. These situations became the instruments for his commission of series of murder. It seems that most of his victims are gullible and easy to deceive. He had every chance to do the criminal acts he intended to do. Also, the lack of effectiveness of the police made his criminal activities unnoticeable to the society.
This man with a quiet, almost shy demeanor became a master manipulator who was able to lure strangers he met at gay bars to his apartment. He was even able to con the police into returning a 14-year-old boy to him after neighbors called 911 upset that the child was in the street.